In 146 BCE, the Roman general Scipio Africanus led his army to victory over Hannibal Barca in a battle that lasted only 3 days. It's known as the Siege of Cartagena, and it changed the Mediterranean forever. If you have ever heard of it, after the battle, Hannibal fled to Asia Minor, where he spent the next 3 years raising new armies in an attempt to save his homeland. But Rome was prepared for him. One of the first things you want to do when researching any topic is figure out some background information. This is especially important for something like the Second Punic War, since it's such a massive topic that has been studied by historians for centuries. Drawing conclusions is basically what it sounds like. It's taking all of the information that you've gathered and using it to draw informed conclusions. In the case of the Second Punic War, this means taking all of the information that we've gathered from our secondary and primary sources and using it to draw conclusions about how Rome won the war. One of the most important things to keep in mind when drawing conclusions is to be objective. This means not letting your own biases and opinions get in the way of your thinking. Instead, you need to look at all of the evidence objectively and let it speak for itself. Another important thing to keep in mind is to cite your sources. This is especially important when doing historical research, since it's so easy to misquote or misrepresent sources. Make sure to always give credit where credit is due and cite all of the sources that you use in your research. Luckily for us, there are plenty of resources available on the internet that can help us learn more about this topic. Well, for starters, it's clear that the Romans were able to outlast Carthage. The Punic Wars were fought over a span of nearly 200 years, and during that time, Rome was able to build up a huge advantage in terms of military power and resources. Additionally, Rome was able to take advantage of the mistakes made by Carthage. One of the biggest mistakes that Carthage made was their decision to go to war with Rome in the first place. The Carthaginians were a powerful force to be reckoned with, and they had a strong economy and a powerful military. However, they were no match for the Romans, who were able to use their superior military tactics and their sheer determination to outlast them. First off, we've got websites like Livius.org. This website is dedicated to the history of ancient Rome. It marked the end of the Second Punic War and the beginning of Rome's dominance over the Mediterranean. By understanding how Rome won the siege, we can gain a greater appreciation for the factors that led to Rome's rise to power. If you want to learn more about this topic, be sure to check out the additional resources provided, and it's got tons of articles on all sorts of topics related to the city. For background information on the Second Punic War, I'd recommend checking out their article on the Battle of Cannae. It's a really well-written piece that gives a great overview of this pivotal moment in the war. We also have Polybius's book, The Histories. It's an epic work that covers everything from the Second Punic War to the rise of the Roman Empire. It's a little bit tough to get through, since it was written in Greek, but there are translations available online that make it a lot more accessible. And finally, there are documentaries. And when it comes to documentaries, you can't go wrong with the BBC. Their documentary on the fall of Carthage is really well made, and it gives a great overview of this crazy chapter in history. They had anticipated his every move, and they were ready to stop him. So, how did Rome win? Primary sources are original materials that were created during the time period being studied. They're invaluable for getting an authentic look at the past, and they can include things like letters, diaries, and even pieces of art. Luckily for us, there are plenty of primary sources available that can help us learn more about the Second Punic War. For instance, we've got letters from the Roman statesman Cicero was a contemporary of Julius Caesar, and he wrote a ton of letters covering everything from politics to philosophy. Many of his letters discuss the war with Carthage, and they give a great insight into how the Romans viewed their enemies. We also have the writings of Polybius. As I mentioned before, Polybius was a Greek historian who lived during the Second Punic War, and he wrote a detailed account of the conflict. His work is considered to be one of the most comprehensive and accurate accounts of the war, and it's a great resource for anyone wanting to learn more about it. And finally, there are archaeological finds. Over the years, archaeologists have uncovered a wealth of artifacts that have shed light on the Second Punic War. These include things like coins, weapons, and even pieces of artwork. The most famous discovery probably has to be the Zama treasure, a collection of silver coins that were minted in North Africa during the war. The coins are decorated with images of Hannibal and other figures from the conflict, and they offer a unique glimpse into the culture of the time. Well, it's not some simple tale of good versus evil, that's for sure. In fact, the story of Rome's victory over Carthage is actually a pretty messed up one, which, let's be honest, is probably unlikely, unless you are an expert in ancient history or really just have very little going on in your life. Now, luckily for us, there are tons of resources available on the internet that can help us learn more about this topic. First off, we have websites like Ancient History Encyclopedia. These guys are great, because they have tons of articles written by experts on all sorts of topics related to ancient history. Their website is super easy to navigate to, so it makes it really easy to find exactly what you're looking for. Next up, we've got books. And hey, yes, books are still a thing, even though we live in a digital world. For this particular topic, I'd recommend checking out Carthage Must Be Destroyed by Richard Miles. It is a really well-written book that tells the story of Rome's destruction of Carthage in all its gory detail. And finally, there are documentaries. And when it comes to documentaries, you can't go wrong with the BBC. Their documentary on the fall of Carthage is really well made, and it gives a great overview of this crazy chapter in history. You may have also heard that it was one of the largest sieges in ancient history, a struggle between Rome and Carthage for dominance over the Mediterranean. But if I were to tell you that this war was actually decided by a single battle that lasted only 3 days, you would probably call me a liar. And hey, I don't blame you, because that's exactly what I thought when I first learned about it too. It just seems crazy to think that a war that lasted for 13 years could have been decided so quickly. But trust me, it's true. Hannibal's defeat at Zama marked the end of the Second Punic War and the beginning of Rome's dominance over the Mediterranean. To understand how this happened, we first need to evaluate our reference sources and make sure they're credible and relevant. Now that we've got our sources lined up, let's dive into the topic at hand. So now that we've got some background information under our belts, let's move on to evaluating primary sources. Now that we've evaluated our primary sources, it's time to move on to the next step in the research process, drawing conclusions. So what conclusions can we draw about how Rome won the Second Punic War? Overall, the siege of Carthage was a turning point in ancient history.